All right, so yeah, I just wanted to describe kind of, basically my point though is if my mom and dad just would have talked to me from the beginning, if they just would have talked to me and helped me out and saw me, all the crazy stuff wouldn't have happened. And one of the things that happened was like I remember it was like 2013 or something, or no, yeah, this was like 2014, no, 2015. My uncle came to visit my grandpa, and I was staying with my grandpa. Or I was visiting him too, and my uncle was saying that this is when I was in San Diego, but I was visiting my grandpa in Malibu, and my uncle was calling my grandpa Rojo Diablo, the Red Devil, because he was saying like, because at that time my grandpa wasn't talking to me, so I wrote one of those based on true story books to try to get my grandpa to start talking to me again, to try to kind of explain my side of the story, but so I was explaining how he was kind of like a right winger, and he had that stuff like make Ryan independent, and no talking about the past and all the stuff that I felt that really he set up conditions that really were harmful, and it led to my isolation from my family and alienation from my family. So my uncle was calling my uncle read this stuff. And my uncle was calling my grandpa Rojo Diablo because he was like, Red Devil, because he was like, I was telling my grandpa, like, what was the deal? Like, you tried so hard to make Ryan independent and stuff and did all that stuff while I was in Kauai. And then you ended up getting Ryan hurt, like, in that psych ward where they ended up giving me the shot. When I called my grandpa and I asked him, can you get me out of here? And my grandpa said he would have got me out. But my grandpa told me he didn't believe me that I was in the psych ward. He has a PhD in psychology. He said, you don't have any symptoms of schizophrenia. You don't have any symptoms of mental illness. How did they keep you in there against your will? And I described it was because my mom blackmailed me that she was going to destroy my DVDs, and they forced me in there and all this stuff, right? Because they wanted to make me take medicine, but I didn't need to take medicine. And my grandpa knew I didn't need to take medicine, but my grandpa told me that he would have gotten me out. But, I called my grandpa when I was in there. I said, can you get me out of here? They would have put me out if I had a place to stay, but I didn't have a place to stay. And my grandpa said, no, I'm not going to let you out because this is the consequences of you not being independent. But, and then I ended up getting the shot, and it ended up really hurting me, and I ended up getting a hurt leg after that, And then I could have been independent. If my mom and dad would have just helped me, I could have done big with the basketball. I needed to have the videos because lots of swag flow. I wanted to study swag flow. I'm not going to get into details about that. But I wanted to study, the basketball. I wanted to study also how I played and everything too. And I wanted to study my movements and everything. And I would have been huge with the basketball. And I could have done big stuff if people would just help me get basketball DVDs and videos when I was younger. I wanted my mom and dad to help me. If they just would have just talked to me, and then I could have done that. And then I would have also been big with the raps because I could always write raps and good poetry if I'm playing serious basketball and nervous. But they wouldn't talk to me, and they didn't help me. If they just would have talked to me and saw me, things could have been a lot different. But, when I was in the psych ward, I called my grandpa. I was like, can you get me out of here? And my grandpa was like, well, this is consequences of not being independent. Consequences of not being independent. But then later, I talked to my grandpa, and my grandpa was like, well, I didn't really believe that you were in the psych ward. I thought, I couldn't, how could they have done that if you don't have any symptoms of a mental illness? So he didn't even believe me. And then my uncle was calling him Rojo Diablo, Red Devil, because he was like, you basically tried to force Ryan to be independent, and then you ended up getting him hurt. I got hurt from that shot. I ended up suing for $50,000 if I got hurt, and I want to sue more, but I got hurt from that shot, and I got, a lot, and I ended up hurting my leg after that, and partly because I wanted to get a apartment on the first floor, but mom was like, gave me an apartment on the second floor, and she was like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You need to be independent, blah, blah, blah. Like, and basically the alienation and isolation from my family set up by my grandpa that, talking about the past, because when you're in the flow, you're in the present moment. And I always thought that was white supremacist, because I was like, yeah, that's what the white supremacists do. They say, don't talk about the past, right? And yes, there's a time and a place when it's not appropriate to talk about the past, but I wasn't talking about the past, and I talked to my friend Noah about this. I wasn't doing it to try to make my mom and dad hate me, right? I mean, to like holding a grudge. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm not stuck in the past. I'm trying to tell them about the past so that they will let go of their grudge and their, contempt toward me, because I want to let them know it wasn't my fault. It was a shoot-away machine, So I'm not stuck in the past. I'm really not. I just want to be able to talk to them about what's important to me, and that's telling them about how the shoot-away machine messed up my shot, and it wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. If it wasn't for the shoot-away machine, none of the crazy stuff would have happened. But they should just talk to me and see me. But Anyways, so back to the story. This was in like 2016, 2018. Like I said, I had my whole life I was a communist, left wing, anti white. Then around 2014, I became a right winger, nationalist, pro white. Then like then went back to being a communist, and then I went back to becoming a right winger like 2016, 2018. Or no, to 2020 I was a right winger. And basically this is kind of stuff that was leading me toward the right wing, like some of the things that my grandpa would teach me. So like one example was my grandpa would teach, because this is what Dr. Hora taught. My grandpa got his PhD in metapsychiatry from Dr. Hora. And one of the things that Dr. Hora taught was he said that Jesus, when he was on the cross, he didn't really, he said that the depictions of him crying or being in suffering and stuff are not accurate because, according to Dr. Hora, the body's an illusion and the self is an illusion. And he apparently like met up with a Zen Buddhist. I read about this, and he asked, what do you think of the cross and Jesus? And the Zen Buddhist drew Jesus laughing while holding the cross. And, Dr. Hora was like, yeah, Jesus wasn't suffering on the cross. He was laughing. And the idea, and it's kind of like a Gnostic idea. The Gnostic idea was that Jesus was laughing because he's not really his body, right? But that's what kind of metapsychiatry teaches, is that the self is an illusion and the body's an illusion. And my grandpa would kind of teach that, all physical reality is an illusion. But my grandpa, see, Dr. Hora was more New Age, more metaphysical. And he said that reality is like a dream and it's like a hologram. But my grandpa tried to make everything very New Age, but also naturalistic. So my grandpa's like, yes, the body's physicality is an illusion. Material, the body's an illusion because everything is energy. And energy is quarks, which is non-physical. It's non-tangible. But he didn't believe in like the Plato's world of forms and the supernatural stuff or synchronicities and stuff. My grandpa's very naturalistic, but he believed everything was energy. But he didn't believe in stuff like gematria and, and he didn't believe in God, but, he thought that everything was energy, but he didn't believe in gematria or synchronicities and stuff. But I think that that's more accurate of reality. It's like a dream, and there's synchronicities and there's gematria, there's codes and stuff. And I think Dr. Hora would have even concurred with that. He would have agreed with that. But my grandpa wanted to be very rationalistic and New Age at the same time. Like, well, everything's energy. Jesus could manipulate energy, but there is no, Torah codes and gematria. And my grandpa didn't believe the quadrilateral. He thought that was magical thinking. He thought that it wasn't true. He was like, reality is too complex. There isn't one like code behind everything. That's magical thinking. So he didn't understand the quadrilateral. But he was like New Age, very naturalistic, and he kind of detracted or it went away from Dr. Hora's teachings, which were more New Age and more like metaphysical. And but my grandpa, like, so he taught that idea that Jesus didn't, my grandpa kind of believed what Dr. Hora believed, that Jesus didn't really suffer on the cross, that Jesus laughed because he didn't suffer at all, because he realized that the body's an illusion and the self is an illusion. But Dr. Hora would say it's like a hologram or a dream. My grandpa would be like, well, it's an illusion that it's all energy. And it's very naturalistic and rationalistic. Like, yes, and the consciousness pain just is an emergent phenomena from energy events. But that's not what you are, because where do you start and where do you end? But that's not really what Dr. Hora taught. Dr. Hora was a much more metaphysical New Age. But so, so my grandpa's teaching me this. And so my grandpa's teaching me, like, yeah, if you're in the flow, you don't get angry. But then I was like, well, what about when Jesus said, like, Father, why have you forsaken me? Wasn't he upset? Wasn't he angry? But, I later studied, my grandpa was like, he didn't think that he was. But, I read later that Dr. Hora addressed that, and Dr. Hora said, yeah, he, perhaps he was just like, quoting King David when he said that in the Psalms, or that's what other people say too, that he wasn't really upset. And he was actually like, it was like victorious. He was being victorious or being like, celebratory when he was saying, Father, why have you forsaken me? Because he was quoting King David, who ended up being raised and lauded. And so regardless, though, but my grandpa would teach, like, okay, getting angry is not in the flow. So I was thinking, like, well, and also, so my grandpa, but I was like, what, didn't Jesus get emotional and stuff? Like, didn't Jesus overturn the tables and stuff? And my grandpa was like, in my grandpa's way of seeing it, most likely not. But my grandpa would say that if Jesus did stuff like that, he wasn't really angry, but he was in the flow. And the idea is when you're in the flow, now I know, like, I talked with my grandpa a lot more about this, and I got deeper understanding much later. But at this time, I was just confused because I thought that my grandpa was teaching me not to show emotions at all. But my grandpa would teach, like, if you're in the flow, you're not attached to any emotions, because emotions are self-confirmatory. And the self is an illusion. The body's an illusion. So my grandpa's like, yeah, you know, if you're in the flow, you're not, you can have emotions, but you're not attached to them. And it's like you don't really experience them. And now I know Dr. Horus' teachings. It took me a long time to understand Dr. Horus' teachings, but, you know, now I've studied it, and what he kind of taught is that experience-based reality, experience-based thinking is an illusion, because this reality is an illusion. It's appearances, and appearance is an illusion. And emotions are based around the physical body and appearances, and it's all an illusion. So now the way I see it is he's kind of more Platonic. Like, this world's an illusion, appearances are an illusion, you know, so emotions and sensory-based thinking and, you know, stuff like that, that has to all be an illusion. So you want to transcend that to the flow, or to the spiritual, where you transcend experience. And then you get to, like, insight and intuition and the flow and truth, right? But my grandpa never really understood Plato, and my grandpa was against Plato, and that's the other stuff that confused me. My grandpa's like, I don't understand Plato. I think everything's energy. But Dr. Horus seemed to be more like into Plato, Platonic, like this world's a reflection, it's a hologram. But my grandpa didn't understand that. My grandpa's like, well, I think it's just all energy. Like, it's just all energy events, and he was more rationalistic, and it's just, you know, evolving toward the you know, the omega point. So my grandpa was like Dr. Horus, New Age, but very rationalistic and naturalistic, and it just confused me. And I think more in terms of what Dr. Horus taught. But so I was just confused, but my grandpa's like, yeah, you know, if you're in the flow, you don't get angry. There's no anger. But I'm like, what about Jesus? Like, and the other thing, but my grandpa's like, no. So, but that was the other thing, was I thought that was kind of like white supremacist. My grandpa's like being white supremacist again, because when I was a communist, I didn't like that idea, like, don't get angry, and like I thought that spirituality and like religion was just white supremacy, because it's like, yeah, don't get angry, just accept your lot. And it's like, yeah, just accept where you're at. And as a communist, I'm like, no, you want to get angry, and you want to overturn the system, and you want to destroy the system, and, you know, telling people to not get angry and just, you know, just accept their lot in life and everything. That's just the way to maintain the status quo and maintain white supremacy and all that, right? So another thing but at this point, when I became a white supremacist, like in 2016, like when I was more like right-wing nationalist, I started to go more toward my grandpa's teachings, like, yeah, don't get angry. But now I have a deeper understanding. Now I do, at this point in my life, like, okay, yeah, because when you're angry, that can be self-confirmatory. It's narrowing your consciousness and stuff, and you know, and you want to transcend the self and transcend the ego, because that's how you get to intuition and the truth. Because, yeah, this world's kind of an illusion, right? And you want to transcend the body and transcend the self, right? But, you know, but at the time I thought it was just white supremacist teaching. I always thought that spirituality was just white supremacy, maintaining the status quo. And another example of that was, like, I remember, but like I said, at this point in like 2016, 2020, during that period, all the way to 2020, I was a white supremacist, nationalist, right-winger, and I was more religious. I became more religious, and I was kind of adopting my grandpa's teachings. Like, yeah, maybe it is, you know, yeah, don't get angry. Anger is, you know, it's self-confirmatory and transcend the self. Now, like, you know, black people are stereotypically more angry, right? And they show more emotions, but that's self-confirmatory. So again, like, but before I would think that my grandpa was just a white supremacist again. Like, yeah, oh, don't show emotions, don't get angry. That's just white supremacy. Now I have a deeper understanding that my grandpa would say, well, sometimes anger and, you know, showing emotions and emotionality, it can raise your level of lightness, and that can lead you to the flow. There's no formula to the flow. But at this time, I was just confused, right? So the flow is transcendence of the self, right? So anyways, another example was, like, I remember when I was a communist, like a leftist, and I was anti-white and, like, anti the system and everything. I remember my grandpa was telling me, like, yes, reality is an anti-entropic reordering function, and you know, or life is an anti-entropic reordering function, so you have to be in synergy, and you have to work hard and stuff like that, and it's creating synergy, and it's in counterbalance to the entropy of the universe. And I always thought that was white supremacy. I was like, yeah, because you're German and you're into working hard because it maintains the status quo and, you know, work and all that stuff, right? So I was like, you know, you're just a white supremacist. That's the way I saw it. But and I remember one time I asked him, I was like, well, what about Jesus? Like, he didn't work, because, you know, I was a leftist communist, and I was like, yeah, he didn't work. I wanted to destroy the system. But My grandpa was like, well, he did work. He had 12 people who followed him and he taught them and stuff. But then I was like, well, I discovered the quadrant model. I discovered the theory of everything. My grandpa was like, well, there's no evidence you discovered a theory of everything. And, he never supported me. He never believed it. So, but my grandpa was basically like, yeah, you have to work, you have to create synergy and stuff. But I'm like, well, listen, I'm working hard. I'm discovering theory of everything. I'm doing good, big stuff. But he's like, no, there's no evidence. I don't think you did, So he was like, I think the quadrant model's bullshit. So, but anyways, at this time though, at this time when I became a right-winger nationalist, more white supremacist, I started to kind of like try to adopt my grandpa's teachings, like life is anti-entropic reordering function, and yeah, you got to work hard and that type of stuff, right? And I wanted to maintain the system, and I wanted to support white people, in my opinion. But the thing was though, but my grandpa so I would get confused though, because I always saw like the spirituality is like white supremacist and it maintains a status quo, and my grandpa kind of believed in like reincarnation and stuff. So when I was a left winger, I believed in Darwinism, and I thought that religion was just like an outgrowth of Darwinism. Like the only reason why people have the religious teachings, like the Jews believe to not eat pork, is because it had survival benefits and it maintained the group and that maintained the genes of the group and so on and so forth, right? But because I wanted to destroy religion, because I thought religion was white supremacist and it maintained borders and maintained division. But then when I became a right winger, I wanted to maintain religion. I wanted to maintain division, and I became more religious. My grandpa would confuse me because he was very naturalistic and very so like for instance, like he didn't believe in God. Like my grandpa would be like, yeah, no, those prophets didn't really hear the voice of God. They were just inspired. They were in the flow, and the Bible wasn't inspired by God. It was just compilation of people, desert nomads, or people in that time, and some of it is written in interpersonal consciousness and lower levels of consciousness, and a lot of it's transpersonal consciousness, but it's not divine. But the quadrant model said otherwise. The quadrant model, even the JPD thesis, like my grandpa was like, JPD, that's the idea that there's 4 people who wrote the Bible or wrote the Old Testament, but it's like a naturalistic version of it. And it says it's not from God, it's not from Moses. But I would say, well, even that, it's based off 4 people, and that's even the naturalistic explanations point to a higher power. Like it's the idea, like Satan might be, or the illusion of reality might be trying to make you think that there's a naturalistic, rationalistic interpretation, but it's not really. There, even behind that, there's you see the quadrant pattern. You see that there is a higher order or higher power organizing it. But my grandpa wouldn't believe that. My grandpa didn't believe the quadrant model. He was very naturalistic. So, but that's why it confused me, because I always saw naturalistic people as being more left wing, and I was more left wing, and because I wanted to destroy religion and make everybody mix. But now I understand my grandpa wanted people to transcend the ego. But my grandpa didn't realize that. I would tell him, well, don't you believe in the naturalistic explanations? Like, don't you believe that, Grandpa? And he's like, I don't believe it. That's just my framework of understanding. I don't grasp onto that belief. You believe the quadrant model. My grandpa always looked down at me for believing the quadrant model. Like, you believe the quadrant model. That's bad. Like, you should, if you're in the flow, you don't believe anything because you're open inspiration. But I was like, dude, you believe the naturalistic explanations. Like, but he's like, no, I don't believe it. It's just my framework of understanding. But I'm open to new insights and stuff like that. But that's my current framework of understanding, to look at it as everything is energy. But that's not what Dr. Hora taught. And really, in my opinion, that was his ego, and he was grasping onto that. And like I said, when I was like anti-white, I thought like, well, Rabbi said that that's the way the Germans think. They tend to be very naturalistic and think everything's energy. They don't believe in Hashem. They don't believe in a higher power. And I wanted to race mix the white people and the Germans, and that like was more impetus for me to do it. I'm like, they don't understand reality. My grandpa doesn't understand reality, and neither did my uncle. My uncle didn't believe the quadrant model either. He always made fun of it. But I always felt like Jews understood it more, and black and darker people understood it more. So I was like, yeah, this gave me more impetus to want to race mix the white people, who I thought didn't understand reality, right? So, but yeah, so my grandpa was just confusing me because he had those like naturalistic ways of looking at things which were more left wing, and I liked that because I wanted to race mix people when I was a communist leftist. But then he also had the right wing, like spiritual ways of looking at things, like and you know, he believed Jesus like multiplied bread and did all that stuff, and I wanted to believe that it was just metaphors, like metaphors of sharing, you know. And when I went to these cults, like the Korean cults, they had a lot of black people and brown people in it, and they seemed to be like making fun of religion, and making fun of Christianity. And one way they did that was like one of the groups, the Christ Ansang Hong group, they like worship the goddess, and you know, they're kind of, because they're kind of, they're religious, but they're also kind of moving away from religion and making fun of it because they're kind of anti-white, you know, anti-Christian, because, you know, I always saw Christianity as white supremacists, and they probably did too. And but regardless, like, yeah, so I was just confused, but you know, I felt like my grandpa he didn't understand reality. But I liked his, like, when I was a communist, I liked his naturalistic stuff that was anti-religion, because I thought religion was white supremacist. But then when I became a right-winger, I wanted to more believe in the more religious ways of looking at things. I'm starting to think, like, you know, maybe my grandpa, my grandpa's wrong about everything as energy and stuff. But also my grandpa had this right-wing points of view. Like, yeah, like one of the right-wing things is like, you know, don't give to the poor, because, you know, that's just like, it's just enabling them. But, you know, when you give, it's not in order to help the poor, but it's in order to help you to let go of your attachments so that you can be more in the flow. But, you know, like, and so, like, one of the things my grandpa taught was, like, I asked my grandpa, well, the Jews say that you should always give to another Jew. Like, whenever you see another Jew that's homeless, always give, like, a quarter. And my grandpa's like, well, if that's a ritual, that's okay. Because my grandpa would be like, every ritual takes you out of your habits and circumstances and, you know, other people, your relationships, and it helps you take you out of your whims and stuff so you can be more susceptible to the flow. But, and also it can help you to let go of your attachments, that you know, that could be the higher aspiration behind that ritual. Let go of your attachment so that you can be more in the flow, because when you're attached, you can't let go to inspiration and everything, right? But I get that more now. But so my grandpa is very naturalistic, but also religious at the same time, spiritual and, you know, new age, but also naturalistic. And so he's just confusing me. And I'll get more to how he's confusing me. But regardless, at this point, I was moving more toward right wing and more naturalistic.